So, where do I need to? I need to stand right there where you were? Okay. That good, Dan? All right. So, it's good to have all of you back in the same room. You don't know what I've missed being on the stage just looking at Dan and Mark. Hannah was out here too. She was out here. She was the only one sitting down here, but just looking out, not having anybody talk. It was, it was terrible to be away from you guys. I'm just messing. So there's a lot to cover tonight. This is the title of this is How to Get Away with Murder. I only looked at Adrian. so that's what the title of this is. So it's a lot of information on Moses' life, the beginning and through what he endured in his time of just being alive. So again, like I say, I missed being here with you guys and girls, and glad that you're all here tonight. Most all of you's here. There's a couple of you missing, but for the most part, I didn't think this many would come tonight, so it's been pretty awesome. So we'll just dive right in. So again, like I say, we're looking at Moses' life in the book of Exodus. So there are Bibles right here in front of you. We can open it up to Exodus chapter 1, and it starts pretty simple. When you go through and you think of Moses and how his life turns out, most of us learn this as growing up in the kid's life or in any kind of Bible study class or group that you grew up just going to church. And if you didn't go to church when you were a child like I was, I never went to church. So people who like history, this is it. This is for you. For those of you that like stories that play out like sweet movies, this is for you. Not so much this one, but as you go on through this series, it is. So when you think of Moses in Egypt, you might think of the movie The Prince of Egypt, or if you've even seen it, or maybe the image of Charlton Heston. Does anybody know who Charlton Heston is? Great. Awesome. That's what I was looking for. Because, you know, this movie that I'm talking about came out, and he dipped out on us. He knew what was coming. It came out when Mark was a kid. So I'm not saying he's that much older than I am, but he's that much older than I am. Yeah. See, I never looked at her. I didn't point her out. Did I? But so it was just an old movie called The Ten Commandments. I don't know if any of you's ever seen The Ten Commandments. It was like really old, and it was yeah, and it was before CGI. So if you didn't have all that, yeah, they filmed it like real life and colored. Yeah. So the story going here is we have to take a step back into the book of Genesis and look at some of the people who are connected with the beginning of the book of Exodus. See if you recognize any names here as we read through Exodus. And as you go through Exodus 1 through 5, it names a whole bunch of names. I lost interest, I'm not going to lie. Reading is not a strong point that I deal with on any given basis. I don't like to read books. And then when I set out to read the Bible and I wanted to read it in this amount of time and read the whole thing, I lose interest around times like these because it just names names. So it actually says, these are names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family. And it names a whole bunch of names here. I'm not going to go through all of them. But where it comes down to is these are the descendants of Jacob, numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. So that just covers 1 through 5 right there. If you've been going to church for a while, you might recognize some of these names that it mentions in 1 through 5 if you're looking in the Bible. And Jacob and his brother Esau, best I could do with that one, were the sons of Isaac, who was Abraham's son and that he almost sacrificed. So Jacob was the one who tricked his old father into giving him his brother's birthright. Yeah, you heard it right. He tricked his dad, his old man dad, into saying, hey, I'm the other son. Yeah. So that's pretty crazy. But many years later, Jacob wrestled with God until his identity was changed. It was there that God gave Jacob the name Israel. So Israel and Jacob are the same person. That's why it's important with all these names and through here of where we're going with this study. It says, then the rest of the names are Jacob's sons. So what the passage is saying is that all of Jacob's sons, who are known as the sons of Israel, went to Egypt, where their brother Joseph was already. So Joseph is very important here because back in the book of Genesis, this same Joseph was his father, Jacob's favorite son, and was sold into slavery by his brothers. So we read about that a couple weeks ago, being sold into slavery by your brothers. How terrible is that? I'm sure if I had brothers like Nathan and Ethan, I would probably be sold into slavery. Beg someone to take me. That's right. So you get through here and it says, so Joseph worked his way up through the ranks of Egypt's government, from being a slave all the way up to being second in command, only answering to Pharaoh himself. So just in case you didn't know, Pharaoh is not just one person in all of the history books. Pharaoh was a title like king, or like we have president here. So it's just a leader of the nation or the world almost at that time that they lived in. So in Exodus 1:6-7, it says, now Joseph and all of his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. So Joseph and his brothers were all gone, but the community of Israelites, who were the descendants of Israel, also known as Jacob, grew rapidly. And God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then a new king who did not know about Joseph came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if a war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So what he's saying here is there's too many of them. It's going to be a mutiny. They're going to start their own army, and they're going to kill all of us because there's way too many of them to control. Then as you go further in, it says the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. So making their slaves as horrible as possible, making their lives as horrible as possible, they continued to multiply and grow. So Egypt, afraid of the Israelites rising up against them, made the rule that when an Israelite or Hebrew baby was born, if it were a female, she could live. So if it was a male, they would kill him. But the Hebrew midwives who helped deliver babies refused to do this. And so God blessed them, and the Israelites increased even more. One of the boys during this time was hidden for 3 months after his birth. Knowing that she couldn't keep him safe, his mother put him in a basket and set it down the Nile River. So at this time, the Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile and found the basket. She opened it, felt sorry for the baby, and she naturally just took it. Well, she took it in. Felt sorry for the baby. The baby's sister popped out and asked if Pharaoh's daughter wanted one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for her, and that woman agreed. So the sister went and got her mother, the baby's mom. And Pharaoh's daughter paid her to take care of her own child until he was older. So in new kind of days, we call that child support. Yeah, that's what we call that. A little joke in there. Nobody got it. Thank you. But either way, so once he was older, it was time to name him. And Pharaoh's daughter named him Moses. So a lot of information just to get to even know how Moses was named. So now we get into the life of Moses. So Exodus 2:11 through 14 says, one day after Moses had grown up, he had went out where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating one Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and glancing that way, he was looking around, he was looking everywhere. He went right over and he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So the next day, he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, why are you hitting fellow Hebrews? The man said, who made you ruler or judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed that Egyptian? So somebody saw him. Then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. So as he was burying him in the sand, I imagine somebody was standing behind a bush somewhere watching what was going on, worried he was going to get killed too. So this moment right here is so significant because it shows that by the time he reached adulthood, Moses, who was raised to essentially be in the royal family, realized that he was an Israelite. And the fact that Moses was willing to identify with God's people and defend the Hebrews may have caused him to act radically. But it also shows that he had faith in God. Moses rejected the temporary pleasures of sin for the horror of suffering for God and with God's people. So Luke, Jesus' disciples who wrote the book of Acts, put it like this. When Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptians. The Egyptian. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. So what I want you to understand here is no matter what you think you've done in the past, God has a plan and a purpose for you. So Moses had one of the most messed up beginnings to his life. He was supposed to be killed as a baby, but instead he was spared and floated down a river with crocodiles and all sorts of other animals. He was picked up by royalty and then raised by his biological mother. Then he was separated from her and raised as someone else. Then he grew up with an identity crisis, which led to him killing a man. So while I doubt that any of us have killed anybody, whether it's a pleasant one or one filled with struggles, God has a plan and a purpose for our lives. Maybe you were raised in a Christian household. I wasn't. So the next one's for me. Where God was only mentioned by cuss words. That was my household. So maybe you were raised with a loving family, or maybe you were raised with no family. Or really, no matter how any of us were raised, God still has a plan for us. So we have the advantage of being able to read the full story of Moses and how God used him. So we know it all works out in the end for him. But imagine the struggles he encountered as he was trying to figure out who he was or what to do after killing someone. If God can use Moses, he can use us too. So the word got around to the Pharaoh that Moses had killed an Egyptian. So he wanted to have Moses killed. So Moses fled to live in a place called Midian. The Midians were descendants of Abraham through Abraham's second wife, who he married after Sarah's death. So Moses fled to Midian, where he met a priest and his daughters and eventually married one of them. He then lived there for 40 years and raised a family. So now we get a lot of age on him, a lot of age on Moses. So during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out. And their cry for help because of their slavery went to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. So there's something powerful here that we all need to understand. Like I say, it's a lot of information to take in. But when you turn to God, he does respond to you. So after many years of oppression, the people of Israel began to call desperately on God for help. Before this time, many of them had been worshiping Egypt's false gods, and they had probably been depending uselessly on them for help and relief. But when they turned to the Lord and cried out to him, he responded. So in Exodus 3, it says, "Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb." Sounds good. The mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of the fire within the bush. So we've all heard about the bush catching on fire, burning there. Moses saw that and thought the bush was on fire. It did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. So now before talking about the burning bush, do you realize what Moses was doing? What was he doing during that time? Tending the sheep. That's right. He was tending the flock. So they weren't even his sheep, but he was tending them. So because Moses, and for each of us, God plans for our lives. So I'd say it's a lot here. So so it's odd the way it's worded. But what he's doing here is he's showing that it takes seasons of preparation. So remember, he was 40, he went on, he got married, 40 years went by. He's tending somebody else's flock, and he gets this message. And it goes here and says, even though through Moses had received the highest level of education in Pharaoh's royal household, his education was not enough to equip him for God's work. He needed time alone with God and 40 difficult years of tending sheep in the desert to prepare him for his future task of leading Israel out of slavery in Egypt. So Moses was over 80 years old. He had to wait quite a while to fulfill God's plan for his life. So God calls Moses from a burning bush. And what he says here is, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. So you have to realize that when God has called you to do something for him, he will be with you. We don't serve a God who leaves us high and dry. We don't serve a God who asks us to do something and then doesn't provide what we need to do it with. We serve a God who, when he calls you to do it, will see you through it. So Moses says, suppose I actually go and do this, and they ask me who you are. What should I tell them? So God says right here, who? He says, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God said that right there to Moses. Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. So one of the most powerful statements here in this entire Bible is, I am who I am. What's most powerful about this is that God was saying he wants to be known as the God who is present and active. He didn't say, I was who I was. That he was the God who wants to be remembered for doing all the great things in the past. But by saying, I am who I am, he is saying that he is the God who does great things today. Not only that, but as Jesus was being questioned in John chapter 8, he used this same phrase and called himself, I am, which led to him slipping away while everyone grabbed stones to throw at him. We serve a God and a Savior who is, not who was. The same that was with Moses is the same God that is with you today. It may seem like you're all alone as you're going through all of this we're going through. This is so relatable to what's going on right now. You're sitting in a pink dot chair. It's a big deal. But he said, I am who I am. So God is here. And when you turn to him, he responds. It may not be loud like you're hearing right now. It may not be loud. But God will respond in his own special way when you turn. Things may not turn around instantly for you. I know that for a fact. But for Moses, it took a season of preparation. But just know that God will be with you through all of it. So remember how long it took Moses? It took a long time. He lived 3 different lives almost. 3 different lifetimes he lived through before it was his time to do what God wanted him to do. For some of us, we may have to do the same thing. So just remember, God is who he is and not who he was. Again, I'm glad that we're able to get back in the same room together. What's up, Adrian? I can't hear the question.
How come, like, why was he serving sheep instead of, like, doing something like, I don't know, like something more higher up?
So that was the times of where he thought he was going to be caught for killing the Israelite. I mean, that was right there in the story. But, you know, you figure he lived all these years in there, and then he killed the Israelite. Killed the Egyptian, yeah. So then he lived out his life there. So I think that's what made the big move in his life of where he went back to being a servant. Remember, it's 40 years he got married. And then sometime after that, he started tending flocks of sheep. And he was tending them over, way out and heard the cry. And that's what, saw the burning bush, and that's what put him where he was, to further himself as we'll go on through some of these other studies in the coming weeks, and you'll find out a lot more about Moses. Again, thanks for being here. Hope to see you again next week. Hopefully we can do it outside next week. It won't be raining on us.
Okay, set up a small group.
Okay.
Ladies, I'm putting you in the front of the kids' life area, the front lobby area, or worship area. Your chairs are spread 6 feet apart, so if you'll do that. I'm going to let the high school guys stay in here.
Okay.
And then middle school guys, we're going to take the chairs off the back row and we'll set them up right out in the 6 foot area.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Hey, you guys, stay away from each other 6 feet. 6 feet.
6 feet.